Hi, this is Alan Mackay and welcome to video 4. This one I just put together and I'm trying to get this out as fast as I can to you. And this is piggybacking on all the work we've done so far. So far we've gone through a lot. We've gone through creating all the dynamics. We've also gone through creating all the beam effects. We've then taken that full circle back to finalizing all the dynamics and destruction, doing all the shape collision caches, optimizing it all down, choreographing all the effects. Now that they're all locked, we're in a position where now we're going to create all the fluids, all the dust, and all the pyrotechnics. All of these effects that are going to be driven by the dynamics. So utilizing all the animation that we've simulated, now we drive the effects based on that. So we're going to get full interaction as we're going to get really great results. In this video, we're going to be taking what we're working on so far and creating all the pyroclastic dust, all the thick dust elements, and heavy pieces of debris hitting and breaking, and all that good stuff. So this is a chance to dive into fume effects and create a lot of fluids and do a lot with it. So this is definitely a key skill to have, as being able to create realistic fluid simulations, realistic dust, all of those sorts of effects are really critical. So in this video we're going to be creating all of this. In the next video we're going to be taking it even further, creating all the fire, explosions, pyrotechnics, all of the elements that go with this. So these will go hand in hand, and I think these two elements are going to work really well. So one thing I wanted to mention is I'm still using Fume Effects 4 rather than using Fume Effects 5. I just kind of personally like it a little bit more, but everything in here is exactly the same. The process is identical. The only thing really majorly different is the preview window is now instead embedded in the viewport. So it might look a little bit different, but the workflow is exactly the same. It's still the exact same solver. So that being said, let's dive into this video. One thing I wanted to also mention is I've got a special surprise for you. So keep an eye on your email tomorrow. I think you're really going to like this. In the meantime, I can't wait to see what you come up with in this lesson. And anything that you're doing, feel free to tag me in the post on Instagram or Vimeo or wherever you like. I would love to see what you're working on, and I would love to see you sharing the progress that you're making. I've already seen a lot of really awesome results so far. So let's dive in. Okay, so we've been doing a lot. We are getting there. Now, these are the final finishing touches that we're going to be putting onto our first building, and then we'll be rolling it out for everything. So it's definitely a long journey, and that's the thing, is it isn't like you're trying to do quick little fixes. We're trying to do big epic shots, so there's a lot of work that gets involved in that. So at this point, like, we've got the beam, we've got all the destruction all locked down, we've got a lot of secondary effects. We haven't got those fireworks yet, but what I want to look into now is going to be doing explosions and dust, things like that. So I'm going to focus on the dust right this minute, and then we'll work on the explosions next video. So what I want to do is I want to have like thick dust being kicked up from all the destruction going on. So hopefully you saw that I just turned off the secondaries, just because, like, you know, we don't need them right now. They're just going to slow things down. And we got the destruction, it's all cached, everything's moving pretty well. We don't need the beam, I'm going to turn that off as well. What we do want is, as this all explodes, you know, I just want it trailing up in the air. We'll probably do like dust there, but I want to focus on the big, thick pyroclastic dust first. So in this case, I want, essentially, when all this stuff comes hammering down, so I think it's around frame 165, at that point, I want it to go boom and have like a big pluming, thick smoke, dust kind of effects shooting up everywhere. So let's just dive into this. First, I'm just going to bring up my layers, and let's just dock this to the left. We'll make destruction render visible, and the reason for that is so I can go fume effects. And just create a fume grid, and we'll name this fume grid, let's just call this Big Dust 001. Say dash 001. Alright, and let's just give it some spacing. Nothing too big, just something like that. And here's the thing, I wanted this to actually start right as the hammer, I keep saying the hammer, but when all the debris comes crashing down. So why don't we just for now hit right click on the play button and change this to 160. And that way there's no pre-roll. We can just kind of dive right into it, okay? Now, let's just get our fume. And again, like, I gotta look at the shot context here, okay? So, I mean, we could have simulations that are huge around the whole grid. From the camera perspective, we're only gonna really see the foreground. So, I would rather just focus on having a simulation in the foreground, and if we need to later, we can do further back. I'm not too concerned about height yet. Later on, we'll want to give it a lot of height. But let's just try something along the lines of that, okay? So with that now active, I'm going to go to Destruction Controls, just so that way any emitters, helpers, things like that get created there instead. All right. So big thing right now is going to be, let's just set up the dust. So we'll call this big dust, or actually let's call this thick dust. I might actually name it thick dust. I think this is going to make more sense. And you know, it's very similar to what we've done before. Initially, I just want to create based on the ring, basically the big ring up here. I want to have this fire down particles onto the ground, and those are then going to kick everything up. So again, we're going to make it procedural in the sense that we'll have the generation being triggered by everything above it. So we won't worry about the beam, but in thick dust, I'm just going to create a few dynamic sets. The first one, we'll just name it, oops, accidentally. All right, so we're going to name it create. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to go that beam origin on. Let's make that visible just so we can see it. So I'm just displaying these as on. And let's just go into atmospherics. I'm going to create a new group, and let's just name this thick dust. And I think we've done this before. Basically, we'll have like the head, and then we'll have the trails. So I'm going to say thick head, and then FFX. Do a position born. And as we can see, we have the particles spawning from that point. So I'm just going to drop this into the head. Do a pistol shot per call. We'll say like 350 particles. And the big thing is, all I want to do is I want to essentially create a ring around, like around the destruction, okay? Because we have all this stuff fire down. I want to generate a ring up here, and then I'm going to snap it down to the ground. So initially, we'll just do a particle age, link this up, and the big thing is just enter group. We're not going to give it any speed. So let's just take a look in here. I'm going to set the lifespan to like 150. 0 speed. All I want to do is I want to set the emission distance. Okay. So let's just do a PPAS AB. And the reason for that is that, you know, we've done this a lot before. So, I mean, it's kind of cool because now you can start to see the repetition a little bit. The reason for this is basically that we want to fire stuff down to the ground. So, where are we? Collision ground. And then we're going to get the head here. Okay, and we'll do an intersect. So like I said, we're starting to kind of repeat this a little bit, which is a good thing. It means that, you know, these are common tools that we're using in completely different ways. So we're going to plug in direction in here. And we'll do a time interval, just because I only want to set this for one frame, 165. Okay, so we could do it triggered by, you know, something else. We can make the whole thing procedural, but I don't mind doing time intervals, because I know at 165 the direction changes, I think, or is it 160? So, you know, we could totally trigger that to trigger everything here, but, you know, why go crazy? So let's just plug that in. Sorry, intersect on. Let's plug that in. Okay, now I want to get the position from our particles and the shape from the ground. And so all this is going to do is it's going to fire a ray down, and we'll say like pretty high, negative, sorry, just do 900 for length. Now, once that fires the particle down, all I want to do is then, sorry, plug a position born in, which will spawn particles here. So when I get the position from here, the hit turns it on. And I might as well link these up so the particle goes in here. The main thing is I want to get the direction, and I want to send that down. Sorry, random is what I'm trying to say. So exactly the same as before. I just want to randomize the direction outward, because I basically want this to shoot down, and hopefully it makes sense what we're doing. We're just getting these particles, we're going to shoot them down to the ground and spawn new ones and make them spread outward. Technically, we could just, like, you know, reposition this, and that position I just did a second ago is exactly how we would do that. But I'm just going to do it this way because I just want to kind of showcase ways that we can substitute one thing for another. So I'm actually going to output these into the head as well. So suddenly we're going to have two sets, and I don't want that. See how these new particles are being generated on the ground? They're kind of hard to see, but there's new particles there on the ground. Well, what I want to do is I want to make it so that way the old ones, once they're triggered, die. So I'm just going to link this back up and then say on based on the hit. And that's why when these are born, okay, it's then going to kill the old one. So what will happen is we'll notice these particles disappear as the new ones get generated on the ground here. Okay, so that's, you know, again, we could just reposition it, but I figured that way we got a bit of control. And, you know, at that point we could reset the lifespan to like 35. We give it a little bit of speed. Main thing is the direction. We're only going to vary it upward a little bit, or sorry, outward a little bit, so it's more kind of goes a little bit up. Might vary the lifespan. But those are the main things. I'm just throwing this stuff in. I'll do pistol shot per call. And so what we get is just we have these particles lingering up here, doing their thing, and at 65 they recreate on the ground, and they kind of just spread outward a little bit, okay, or randomly outward a little bit. And from there, I can use that to generate, you know, our effects. We can use that to drive a lot of it. So once we get that going, I want to go spawn fume effects, and I might also throw in some forces because I know I'm going to end up using them. So with the spawn, this is where the fume will be driven from, and this is what I want to start to generate particles with. So initially I'm going to get the head. I'm going to do the position born. I'm just going to get the position and direction technically it knows where it's going to get the direction. Sorry, not what am I doing? Direction. It'll know where to get the direction from, so I don't need the exposed direction necessarily. And these ones are going to go into that fume effects, okay? And I'm going to make these pistol shot per call as well. Main thing is the lifespan is going to be pretty short. So these are constantly going to be being emitted, right? So these particles are on the ground, and these new ones are going to be constantly being created from that point. Now I will vary the lifespan as well because I want to make this as chaotic as possible. Give this some speed. Okay, and vary that. Main thing is that these I don't want to vary the angle too much. So hopefully we can see this. We're just going to have all these particles being generated on the ground here right now. So it's just something that's going to constantly generate. And, you know, I think we need to add some forces. Let's just do that now, just so we can get something going. Initially, I'm just going to get the Vfx. I'm going to do a standard force. And I don't want this to be like crazy big. I just want it to have all the arcs and everything. So kind of the big turbulence is all I really want. So let's make this, I don't know, kind of big. I'm going to mainly just activate the turb big. Link this up. And let's do something similar to the head as well. So I'm going to just duplicate this. We'll change this to the head. Let's make this like 5. So we need, I just wonder if I should hide this stuff so we can kind of focus a bit more. Yeah, let me do that. I'm just going to go into TP Tuner and turn show mesh off for a moment. Same thing with the collision. And that way we can just kind of see this a bit better. So now we can see we have kind of a crazy motion, but we're going to get particles kind of spawning from these. And so this is just a start to kind of get particles kind of kicking out. So it is pretty concentrated right now, but it's just a good starting point. Because now what's going to happen is we're going to have, essentially these are going to be constantly firing stuff out that's going to have a high velocity. And that's what we want, is it to be pushing out. We don't want to see the particles being emitted, like they're not trailing. These are actually going to be like kicking out based on this high velocity stuff. So what might be easier is if we change the colors a little bit. So thick dust Vfx, we'll change this to drops. And then the head will change to ticks, but we'll make this more like a yellow or something. So now as this comes out, you get the idea these are high velocity. They're shooting out, they're going to be constantly blowing dust in every direction. And the only thing that's kind of frustrating is just having these particles. Actually, having it up there is not too big a deal. I mainly just want to kill the ones on the ground a little bit. So what we can do is under spawn Vfx. So one thing I do want to do is I just want to go through and tell the head emitting particles to die out after a while, based on where they go, because I want to limit how high they get. Because some of these particles might kick up really high, and it's going to make the particles go really high as well, which means a bigger fume effects grid, everything. So I want to constrain this, but I want to do it in the nicest way possible. So right now these particles are shooting around. They're kind of crazy. They're not too crazy, but towards the end, I noticed they're starting to get pretty high up in the air like that. And because of that burst, this grid's going to need to be way bigger. So what I want to do is I'm going to set up a particle die. Now let's just set up some conditions. Let's simply say we can do a threshold. I'm going to throw in a particle age, 0.3. So with these, and don't forget my precious and, what are we going to do? So the 0.3, I pretty much want to use that to get the position and just get the Z value. So let's get position, plug the position in, get the Z value as a threshold, and this threshold, I want to say if you're above 1, so you're above the ground, and anywhere up to 60. So what happens now is that the particles, if they're anywhere in this range, like from, let's say if the ground's here, then this would be 0, we'll say 0, then this would be 1, and then 60 is probably somewhere up here. Okay, let's just say it's up here. It's basically saying that anything in this range, it's going to kill in this group. Okay, so what we're doing is by getting the particle die, linking it up, exposing the on, and saying threshold, we're telling it to kill any particles that come in that range. Now, the thing is, we don't want that to happen right away. Instead, I basically want to say after about 10 frames. So it has 10 frames to do its thing, and then after that, we can set up these conditions. Okay, so this simply is going to tell it to start killing any of the head particles that are within that range after a while. So these particles are cool, and then after 10 frames, we're going to notice some of them just kind of snap out of it. Okay, so nothing really kind of gets too high up in the air. All right, whereas before they'll go crazy high. So, you know, doing something like this just helps kind of keep things a bit more contained. Yeah, you can kind of see there what happens, like some of these particles get deleted on 1 frame. Okay, so see how they all disappeared? And so these ones are all safe, but none of the ones were going really high up anymore, and that's exactly what we want. We want to say, yeah, anything between 160 is safe, anything below that, sorry, I might have explained it wrong, but outside of this realm, it should kill. Okay, now, so we've got that set up, we've got these new particles being spawned. I want to create some more, okay? Let me bring up my TP tuner again. I want to create some more particles, because right now we have these particles on the ground, and that's going to look really cool. And we'll do a sim of that, but I want to take things further. I don't want to just have like stuff pluming out, because it's going to look a bit dull. I want it to interact with the geometry more. So let's bring this up. I'm going to create a particle source. We'll link this up, and I'm simply going to choose the thick dust Vfx. We can already see like roughly what the radius is. I want these to be tiny. Okay, I want tiny particles here, but the big thing, the most important thing, is I want to give it a high velocity multiplier. So what that's going to do is, if the velocity multiplier is 1, it's going to kind of keep up with it. If it's 0.5 or something, it's going to trail behind, okay, if the particle's going this way. If it's 2.5, what's going to happen is the fluid is going to emit forwards, okay? So we're going to get that sort of thing. Now, if you imagine every single one of these particles creating like a dust cloud like that, we're essentially going to get this like really forward flowing dust cloud, even though the particles are emitting here. Because the worst thing we want, and you see it a lot, is people create these particles and they emit trails of fluid, and it looks really silly. So we want this to push forward so you never actually see the particles. All right, that's what we're trying to do here. So the velocity multiplier 2.5, very important. We can vary that a little bit. The other thing is that we're not emitting any explosions from this or anything. We actually want the temperature to go downwards, so negative 200. So it doesn't go up, it actually falls down, which is more like dust, you know, because dust has weight to it. It's not like so it doesn't have heat. It's not going to evaporate and go up. So I'm setting the smoke emitter value to 5. So there's lots of physical smoke being emitted. Again, people tend to make the shader really thick, and they just emit like regular smoke, and it means that it just is a thicker shader. This way, there's going to be lots of smoke volume interacting with itself, which is what we want to rely on. Okay, so I just want to do a quick sim of just what we have so far, just so we can get an idea of like what it's going to look like. Oh yeah, actually one last thing. Let's go to Sim tab, go to choose a destination, all that. I'm going to set this to start at frame 160. And let's just go into the simulation tab, just turn off fuel, because we're not dealing with fuel, it's strictly going to be smoke. Okay, so what we have right now is that, and this is low res obviously, but the cool thing is you can see that it kind of falls back down because of that negative temperature. So that's what we want. We want it to kick up, and then we want it to drop back down. And it's doing all of that based on those particles that initially snap to the ground, so no matter where this is, it's always going to be emitting from the ground. It's also emitting from where the beams were created, because we've procedurally set that up to do so. Okay, so like wherever this beam is, like we could move the whole thing right now, and the whole system's going to adjust. The only thing we're doing manually is the time intervals, just because. And so these are shooting out everywhere, and it's shooting stuff up, but then it's going to fall back down, and that's what we want. So another thing is we could set up the shader. I'm just going to give this like a smokier color just for now. Like we can do this later, but that way it's like, ooh, it's dust now. So that's the start. Now, what else can we do to this? Well, I think the big thing is going to be, let's have the option of emitting 2 frames, but we'll set the CFL condition up higher. So let me just explain this really quick. Basically, we're choosing how many steps can possibly be emitted with fume. So in other words, it might sample it twice per frame. So these are subframes. Oops, didn't even know I could do that. Cool. But the thing is, the CFL condition controls how many voxels it has to travel through before it considers that, okay, before it actually samples it. So we're upping the threshold so it's less sensitive to doing subframes, but it can do it if it needs to. The big thing is cubic interpolation, which again is just going to sample things a bit more accurately. The advection stride, don't really need to worry about that. Basically, I just want to do turbulence. You know, I don't actually want to give it too much turbulence, but because this is going to be pretty thick, I'm going to set turbulence to 1.5, which is a lot. But for something moving pretty quickly, it's not. The scale I'm going to bring down. The frame's going to bring up. So, let's put detail. So basically, the scale being low means that it's going to have a lot of high frequency. So rather than getting kind of smoky kind of stuff like that, instead on a dust cloud, you're going to get really crunchy, high frequency turbulence, which kind of helps make it feel more detailed as well as larger because the turbulence is so small. And then the levels is just the octaves. It's just basically how much detail it's putting in. Frames is how quickly it phases. So typically it's controlling how many frames it takes for the phase value, if you look at a noise shader, to go from 0 to 1. Okay, so if it took 5 frames, then this is going to, like, you know, be pretty quick. If it took 20 frames, it's going to be a lot slower because it's 1 to 5, whereas 1 to 20. Okay, so basically the higher the value, the longer it takes to get to that level, so it's going to phase slower. Vorticity, I try and keep my vorticity pretty low. It's just kind of eddies. It's just going to help break it up. But I will make my scale bigger there. So I'm just thinking of what else I might want to do here. Smoke dissipation, I'm going to keep it 0. We don't, well, actually we'll set to 1. We don't really need it to dissipate much. I'd rather kind of stay full-bodied. But the temperature, I'm not going to let that dissipate. So the temperature is essentially for us is the gravity, because we have it as a negative value, so it's going down. So we want it to actually continue to fall down. So we haven't done that much here. We just gave it a little bit of turbulence, made the smoke not die out as quick, because right now it does die out, you know, kind of quick. And then we got rid of the temperature value decay, so that way it, you know, That's cool as well. Lastly, I'm going to set the blocking size to negative Z. And all that means is that the ground, so if this is Z, even though I can't draw in a straight line, this is Z positive and this is Z minus. Sorry, it looks like a 2, Z. Okay, so that means that positive is up, negative is down. And remember that because we're going to use it a lot, but this is saying go down. Okay, and that means that we're going to block it from going down, in this case, blocking side. So it means the ground is now collidable in the container. So I'll run another sim, and we'll see how that turbulence and everything kind of helps. All right. So now, we got a little bit more of that internal detail. There's a bit of distortion, that sort of thing, and, we'll deal with that soon. Basically, that's more to do with, well, a couple of things that you could do. You put a bit of lossy dampening on there. Essentially, having like low turbulence, things like that can, and also vorticity, those two can cause issues with it. I might just keep vorticity at 1 and keep vorticity off for now. But mainly, so far, like, this is looking good. I like what we've got going on. But so far, what we have is just that explodey stuff on the ground. I'm going to call it explodey stuff. But what I want to do is I want to now look at the particles we have here. And basically, if we go into TP Tuner, let's turn on our meshes again so we can see them. And same deal in here. Now, what would be really cool is when the stuff breaks, we could actually get like dust coming from the cracks. I think that would be awesome. And that way, as everything breaks apart, it's going to create dust, and that's going to, just help make more of a cool effect. One thing I'm just going to mention is that I do have geometry that collides with the geo and does all that. It really depends on the situation. Right now, I want my sims to be fast. That's my big concern, because I want to get this training out, and usually what's going to happen is if I use collisions with everything, it gets really slow, because these aren't regular like transform objects. These are one giant mesh that's changing topology all the time. So Fume freaks out a lot with this, so it gets really slow. So there are workarounds for it, but typically in production, I'll try to work without any collisions, and then if I need to, I will bake out some basic collisions for the, let's say, the remaining building. And if I need to go further and have this stuff collide with it, then I'll do that. I kind of work in that kind of phase. So ideally, I try and avoid having collidable changing topology wherever I can. Now, looking at this stuff, like I said, I want to try and get all the cracks and everything going. So what I wouldn't mind doing is going and getting VB1. And let's just output. All right, so I'm just going to output like size, velocity, position, just stuff that I think you're going to need here. And the general idea of what is going on is I'm just going to do a position born. And again, I don't know if I've covered this yet. Maybe I have, but basically, a particle, let's say you have a piece of rock here. A particle is going to be right in the center. So if we're going to emit particles from the particle, they're going to emit from the very center. We don't want that. We actually want particles to emit from the edges here. Okay, so for us to do that, we're going to need to plug in a surface position. I'm pretty sure we have done this, but we're going to get the particle shape and then position here. Okay, so now it's going to read the shape of that, and then it's going to assign positions. The other thing is, let's change it to face, and we'll do face IDs in a second, but let's just output this info. So let's create particles in the thick FFX dust. We'll do pistol shot per call. We'll make them like 10 particles. We'll make them only live for 5 frames, something like that. All right, so that's just a good starting point. Now, if we look, our particles are being generated all over this geometry, which is kind of cool. But we don't want that. Remember how we went back and recached everything so we could see face ID 3? Well, here, this is with the volume breaker. Like here, when we set in the surface position face ID 3, it's only in the areas that's being cut, so the edges that it broke, that actually get emitted. So by doing that, we're able to control where these get created. Okay, so that works a lot better because now the cracks are going to emit. There's other things though. I don't want it to emit from everything. I want to control like the size and the velocity a little bit. So let's just do 2 thresholds. Do one for velocity, one for size. Do the size, the velocity, and I basically just want like, 6, because we did the particle color, so we know that 7, 6 is relatively big. Same thing with the speed. It's just I don't want anything. How do I put this? I only want things, that are not moving to generate particles. So if we say 0 to 5 inside, what's going to happen is we're saying only particles that crack, but they don't actually move. Okay, so we do these two together. Let's do an and then we're also going to say only for the first 5 frames when they get created. So absolute 0 to 5. All right, so let's just set up these conditions. So just set like 3. Then they turn on. So let's just recap this, recap on this. So right now we said only for 5 frames can particles get created on any given piece of geometry. Only if it's not moving. Okay, so it means that anything gets cut but it doesn't explode up in the air. It's just going to be, relatively chilling here. But then also the size has to be relatively big, so we're not emitting from small particles. If all of those conditions are met, then it's going to create a bunch of particles that only live for a few frames. So we end up with something like this, where we're just going to have constant stuff coming from the cracks, but not from all the heavy moving stuff, because that stuff we're going to like blow up. Okay, so by doing that, we're kind of in a good position. We could also go further with it and say only between like, so it doesn't do it forever. We could say like only between 160 to 200. So by doing that, it's only going to be like 40 frames. So like, 2 seconds is going to create all these particles. So now we're going to have these particles on the ground, and then we're going to have these particles coming from the cracks. And together, that's going to create like a lot of cool dust being emitted out. So let's just look at our emitter. I'm going to randomize the lifespan a little bit. I will give this 0 speed. So the particles aren't going to move. Only the turbulence will really affect them. So again, they're not going to shoot out. It's just going to be the turbulence that kind of makes them move around. Okay. So by linking all of this up, I know I should have had these at drops, so let me change the drops. I'll do a preview of this. We can just have a look at it, and then I'm going to go back and do like a Vfx sim and just kind of get an idea for like how this is looking. And keep in mind we got some stuff over here as well, obviously. I wrote a handy script which allows me to do like Vfx previews or viewport previews, and the cool thing is it stores them all. So that way I can access them whenever I want. So I kind of like the idea of this just because it timestamps everything. I talked about this during God of War, where like if I have clients bugging me for stuff, I don't need to spend like half a day or a day putting together a presentation for them, which honestly, it ends up being a couple of people and a lot of work. Whereas this way I can just say, okay, well, here's like 20 different things, or all the latest stuff that we like. And this can be pretty handy at times. So like, for me, I just always have like my eye candy tool where I can do a fume preview and it generates that stuff. It names it all, puts it in the right directory. We can see here it's based on the scene file. So again, this is handy because later, and I've done this so much, I can go back and say, all right, this time, blah, 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 I like this. Where's the file? And I can actually hunt down that file very easily to get it. So situations like this is just kind of handy because then I've got it all stored. Like every single play blast I ever do is always saved out and I can access it later. So I don't know, like again, if this is something that interests you, like this is stuff we do in the mentorship, but if this is something that interests you, then maybe I can put together a quick lesson on how to build a tool like that. It's really straightforward, but you know, that could be something as well. Okay, so if we look here, this is what we're getting right now. So as you can imagine, it's only for a little bit of time that we get like all the cracks and everything happening, but it's kind of cool because when we have all the fluids being emitted, there's going to be lots going on, just like blasting stuff out based on like where things are breaking and things like that. So that's a good start. I'm also going to plug in the direction. I guess we don't really need it because we're not firing out any speed, like any velocity, but yeah, you know, so and either way they're not moving too much either. So I mean, I guess that isn't really too necessary. Let's see. So I think we're in a pretty good spot. We got our forces set up. Everything's pretty cool. So I'm going to do another low-res sim, and then I'm going to look at doing a high-res sim, because I think that now that we have like crap loads of fluids emitting out everywhere, I think it's going to be in a pretty good spot in terms of like just creating chaos. So the resolution is extremely low right now, but let's do a quick sim. Okay, so I'm just going to cancel where we're at, and we'll take a look just at the low res stuff. So as you can imagine, we're now kicking around a lot more dust and everything. A couple of things. I'm just going to go into, right now we don't have any lights set up, so just in the rendering tab, I'm just going to turn on shadows. It'll use default shadows, but turn these on. Let's turn on GPU. At least for smoke, it draws it really well. Now, what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to, let's crank up the density. I'm going to turn this back down once it's high res. Once it's high res, we're going to have so many voxels, it'll be a lot thicker. But let's just start there. I might bring my visual fall off down, crank up the shadow fall off a little bit, just to make it a bit brighter overall. There's not too much I really care about just yet here. We will mess with this later. But as you can see, we're getting some nice kind of simulations from that. All right. So, okay, at this point, I'm going to do a high-res sim. So let's just go over a few things really quick. Turn TP back on. Okay. I'm going to make the grid bit bigger. Something like this, so it's relatively big. I'm going to run a sim of this, so let's just make the resolution bigger. Something like this, it's going to take a while to do it, but I'm going to run the sim, and we can take a look at this, and if it looks good, then we'll start kind of building it up further from here. I'll just move that into place a bit more. Alright, so I'll run a sim of this now. Okay, so this is looking pretty cool. Obviously, I got to do a high res. Sorry, I've done the high res sim. I've got to do a preview. But in terms of the fluid itself, like I'm digging how everything looks, and I'll do a quick preview. The preview, the density is quite low, so it kind of feels a little bit wimpy-ish compared to what it could be or will be. But I think that this is working out really well. So at this point, we're going to start to wrap it up. I'm going to duplicate this basically, and when we duplicate it, I'm going to offset it, and we'll set that up as well. And that way we can do the full sim of the whole grid. So rather than doing a one big grid, I'm going to use multiple grids because that way I can keep it a lot more contained. So I'm just going to hold Shift, duplicate. I do want to make sure there's some crossover here, just so that way they blend together better. And now let's just set the output path. And I will admit, I get lazy. I just hit a button and it automatically creates a new output path, names everything correctly for me, does all that stuff automatically. But you know, either way, like manually set the new output path so you don't overwrite your cache if you need to do that. The main thing is just figuring out where you know, where this needs to go. So for this one, just kind of moving it over so there's enough overlap between the two, that sort of thing. I mean, that's all we really need with this. And that way we just have like a big grid area. So I'm going to run a sim of this, and we'll be able to take a look at it and just kind of get an idea for how this is going to look. Okay, so this is what the current preview looks like of everything simulated. One thing I'm just going to quickly mention is I want to use fluid mapping with this as well, so I'm just going to jump on that in a second. But this looks cool, and this is just a preview of how it looks so far. So I mean, this is, you know, is what it is right now, but basically, you know, in terms of getting like nice kind of pyroclastic dust, I really like what we've got. I think this is going to work really well, especially with all the explosions, fire, things like that. So one thing I wanted to quickly mention before you do your final sims is basically just go into sim, and we want to do fluid mapping. And I want to do this to both grids. You don't have to do this, but I just want to use this to get a bit of extra detail. I don't typically use fluid mapping. It's just on a few productions recently, we've kind of gone, like, fluid mapping is kind of old school, and there's like wavelet and all these other approaches now. But this kind of works just as a way to get a bit of extra detail, and for something like this, I think it might work well. Okay, but that's pretty much it. We can go through the shader and everything. I'm doing things a little bit differently this time around, where usually I would light this and I would do the shaders, I would tweak everything, but I kind of want to wait and do all of that together when we're doing the lighting and the rendering and balance everything else out there. So I'm not as concerned this time around about doing that sort of thing. Basically, this is what it currently looks like, as I mentioned, without fluid mapping or anything, but run your simulations, and then when we get to the lighting, the rendering, you know, getting it photoreal, that's when we can start to balance all this stuff out as well. So I think this is going to be really cool when we get to that point. But for now, I'm just straight up focusing on simulations, and for me, this looks cool. I'm happy with the result. I'm happy with how that turned out. And in terms of like big stuff, like obviously there's going to be more clouds. Like as the other buildings get destroyed, there's going to be stuff everywhere as well as fire, explosions, all that stuff. It's going to be pretty intense. But for now, I'm just going to keep moving forward as we go through this. So run your simulations, and the next thing we're doing in the next video will be doing all the fire and the pyro. There's a couple other things that I wouldn't mind doing, and I think these will be bonus round stuff, but I'd like to add kind of dust trails coming off of these pieces. There's a few minor things like that. I think what we'll do is we'll get it all in the comp, and then we might go back for one final revision where we do a bunch of smaller effects to kind of add to the shot. Okay, so for now, I'm going to wrap this video up, and next video we'll get into doing all the pyro. So I hope you've enjoyed this so far. This video was really fun to do, but obviously it's just the tip of the iceberg. We're going to be getting into a lot of pyrotechnics. We're going to be doing a lot of photorealistic rendering, learning to match up live action and CG together, doing all the HDRI lighting, building all the other buildings, setting up all the destruction, all the simulations, rendering all the elements out, bringing them into comp, color grading them all, setting up everything to be finalized for the finished result. So there's still a lot to come, but at the same time, I'm getting lots of messages and lots of notifications from a lot of you showing me the work that you've been doing so far. So I'd love to see what you're doing, and possibly critique or give some encouraging words as well, wherever I can. And I'm really excited about this. So feel free to tag me in any posts and mention that you're doing this training. I think that is really good to be consistent with this sort of thing as you see your progress grow. I do realize now that we don't have too much time left in this course, and I've had a lot of people asking, hey, can I download these videos, since I won't be keeping these videos in the course online much longer past the final lesson. And the short answer is, I want this to be something that you're not just downloading the video, saving it somewhere, and you know, I'll check it out later, that sort of thing. I want you to be applying this to what you're doing as you go through it. And I want you to apply yourself, and I want you to really utilize the time you have before the end of this course to learn new skills and have the knowledge and understanding to go out there and get work and continue to build up your visual effects career. Now, obviously in a lot of my bigger courses, we cover a lot more content. This City Destruction training is something that I've rushed out, and I want to get to you as quick as I can, as it's something that I think will be really good to get you started. But it's literally just the tip of the iceberg compared to some of the bigger courses, which are 100+ hours of training and go through everything at much more in-depth, as well as at a nicer pace, as I do feel like some of the training here we've definitely rushed through and had to condense down because we're trying to cover so much in the time that we have. So I want you to make the most of the time that you do have in this course. We're already blasting through this training at a very quick pace. Think about what you want to do with this training, and if you're serious about having a career in visual effects, then obviously you might want to look at what the next step is for you. Now, I'm working on the next video as we speak, and I hope to get this to you ASAP. Remember, I've got a special surprise for you. Keep an eye out on your inbox tomorrow for an email from me. I got something really special for you. And in the meantime, get ready. We're about to turn things up with this training as we get into the explosions and pyrotechnics, and we continue to move forward into our city destruction lesson.